Long before anyone ever whispered the words Libra, Scorpio, or Sagittarius, there was only darkness above and uncertainty below. Imagine a night so quiet that even time itself feels slower. No city lights, no calendars, no clocks. Just a faint crackle of fire, the soft breathing of people gathered close, and above them, an endless sky scattered with cold, distant lights. Those lights did not yet belong to anyone. They had no names, no meanings, no promises. They simply were. In that ancient darkness, the night sky was not comforting. It was vast, unknowable, and deeply unsettling. Humans looked up and felt small, fragile, exposed. Each star felt like an unblinking eye, watching silently as generations were born, struggled, and vanished. The sky never answered questions, yet it seemed to demand them. Why are we here? Why does the cold return each year? Why do some lives end suddenly while others stretch on? In the absence of answers, imagination quietly stepped in. At first, the stars were not stories. They were markers of survival. A certain cluster rose before the rains. Another appeared just as the animals began to migrate. Night after night, patterns emerged not because people sought beauty, but because their lives depended on noticing repetition. Hunger, fear, and hope trained the human eye to search for meaning where none was guaranteed. The sky became a silent teacher, harsh but consistent. As generations passed, something subtle changed. The stars stopped being only tools and began to feel personal. A hunter lost to the cold was remembered when a certain light returned. A child born under a familiar sky was thought to carry something of it within them. Slowly, without ceremony, the heavens began to absorb human emotion. Grief clung to certain constellations. Joy lingered in others. The sky became not just a roof over the world, but a mirror. In this era before names, balance did not exist as an idea. Justice was not written in scales. Transformation was not a sacred process. Exploration was not yet celebrated. Life was immediate and unforgiving. And yet, even then, the seeds of Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius were already there, hidden in instinct, the need to keep peace within a tribe, the fear of death and the mystery of what comes after, the urge to move forward, to leave, to search for something beyond the familiar horizon. People did not yet separate the sky into clean segments. There was no zodiac wheel, no need to vision a time. The stars flowed together like thoughts in a half-dream. One night blended into the next. Seasons bled softly into one another. The sky felt alive, shifting, breathing. To look up was to feel watched, but also accompanied. Even fear carried a strange comfort. At least the stars returned, night after night, unchanged. Firelight flickered against faces as elders spoke quietly, their voices low, careful not to disturb whatever lived above. Stories began as murmurs, not declarations. A shape here resembled a creature. A line there suggested a tool. The imagination did not rush. It drifted, like smoke rising slowly into the dark. No one claimed ownership of the sky. The stars belonged to everyone, and no one at all. Sleep came differently then. It was lighter, more alert. Dreams were vivid, tangled with a night sky that hovered just beyond closed eyes. People dreamed of falling upward, of being pulled into the darkness, of becoming light themselves. Perhaps that is where the first myths truly began, not spoken aloud, but dreamed, shared silently across generations without words. Over time, as communities grew and fear softened into curiosity, the sky became less threatening and more intimate. People began to feel that the stars remembered them, that they marked events not just in nature, but in human life. Births, deaths, conflicts, reconciliations, all seemed echoes somewhere above. The idea slowly formed that the sky was not random, that it followed a rhythm, even if that rhythm could not yet be explained. This was the quiet beginning of division, not lines drawn across the heavens, but emotional boundaries. Certain nights felt heavier. Others felt hopeful. Some carried an unspoken tension, as if something important was approaching. Humans began to sense that the sky moved in chapters, even if they could not yet read them. Libra, though unnamed, existed as a feeling, the fragile peace after conflict, the careful sharing of food, the unspoken agreement that held people together. Scorpio existed as fear and fascination, the sting of betrayal, the mystery of death, the awareness that endings were inevitable. Sagittarius lived in restless feet and wandering eyes, the pull toward distant lands, the desire to know what lay beyond the next hill, beyond the edge of the known world. None of this was written. None of it was organized, and yet it was deeply felt. As nights passed and centuries slipped quietly by, humans kept looking up. They always would. The stars did not promise answers, but they invited questions, and that was enough. In the silence between one breath and the next, under a sky still free of names, something enduring was taking shape. Not a system, not a science, but a relationship between fragile beings on the ground and an infinite darkness above. And in that relationship, long before charts and symbols, before scales and scorpions and archers, the story had already begun. As the nights continued to pass and generations quietly replaced one another, the sky began to change, not in its stars, but in the way humans looked at them. What was once a single overwhelming expanse slowly became something the mind could approach, piece by piece. People noticed that the stars did not wander randomly. They returned, always returning. This simple realization carried a strange comfort, as if the universe itself had agreed to remember them. At first, there was no intention to divide the sky. Division implies control, and control came much later. What emerged instead was familiarity. Certain stars rose just before the cold months, others when the air grew warm and heavy. Some constellations appeared during times of abundance, others during hunger. Over time, the sky became a calendar written in light, though no one yet knew how to read it fully. Humans began to mark time not by numbers, but by patterns. When that group of stars returned, it was time to move camp. When another appeared, it was time to prepare for darkness and scarcity. These patterns were not carved into stone or written on bark. They lived in memory, passed down through quiet repetition and shared experience. Children learned them by watching elders point silently upward, their fingers tracing invisible paths between distant lights. This was the moment when the sky stopped being distant and became practical. Survival demanded attention, and attention brought understanding. The heavens were no longer just something to fear or admire. They were something to listen to, and the sky, in its own indifferent way, responded by remaining consistent. As people began to rely on the stars, they also began to trust them. Trust gave rise to interpretation. If the stars could tell when rain was coming, perhaps they could tell more. Perhaps they could explain why certain years were harsh, or why some people seemed blessed, while others suffered endlessly. The sky became a place where questions could be asked without interruption, even if answers never came clearly. Slowly, groups of stars were remembered together, not because they formed perfect shapes, but because the human mind is drawn to connection. A curve here, a line there, suddenly, something recognizable emerged. An animal, a tool, a figure standing upright against the darkness. These shapes were not declared. They were agreed upon quietly, through shared recognition. If enough people saw the same thing, it became real. This was the earliest of vision of the sky, not into signs or symbols, but into stories. Each cluster of stars held a memory, a warning, or a lesson. Some stories were meant to comfort, others to caution. A constellation might remind people not to wander too far at night. Another might warn of danger lurking during certain seasons. The sky became a map not just of time, but of behavior. As stories grew, so did emotional attachment. Certain constellations were spoken of with reverence. Others carried a sense of unease. The stars themselves did nothing to encourage these feelings, yet they accepted them all the same. Night after night, they watched humans project fear, hope, and meaning onto their silent glow. The act of dividing the sky also began to divide experience. Nights were no longer all the same. Some felt heavier, others lighter. Some nights carried a sense of anticipation, as if something important was about to happen. These feelings were subtle, almost subconscious, but they mattered. Humans began to feel that time itself had texture. As settlements became more stable, the need for precision increased. Farmers needed to know when to plant, Leaders needed to know and prepare for conflict. Healers needed to understand cycles of illness and recovery. The sky, vast and orderly, seemed like the only thing large enough to hold all these answers. Slowly, observation became ritual. People gathered at night, not just to survive the darkness, but to study it. They noticed how certain stars shifted slightly over long periods. How some never seemed to move at all. The idea formed that the sky had layers, depth, and structure. It was no longer a flat ceiling, but a living system. This growing awareness led to early boundaries, not drawn with lines, but marked through tradition. A story might only be told during the appearance of certain stars. A ritual might only occur when a specific pattern rose in the east. In this way, the sky began to regulate human life, gently and persistently. Yet even as the heavens became more organized, they remained mysterious. No one believed they fully understood the sky. In fact, the more patterns people found, the more questions arose. Why did these stars matter and not others? Why did some patterns feel powerful while others felt empty? The act of division brought clarity, but it also deepened uncertainty. It was during this time that contrast began to form in human thought. Some star patterns felt calm and orderly, suggesting peace and balance. Others felt sharp, dangerous, unpredictable. Though the names did not yet exist, the emotional groundwork for later signs was already being laid. The sky was teaching humans how to feel before teaching them how to label. There was no rush to define everything. Knowledge moved slowly, shaped by necessity rather than ambition. The night sky allowed for patience. Its changes were subtle, requiring years of attention. In learning to observe the stars, humans learned to slow down. As generations passed, these early divisions became traditions, and traditions became foundations. What began as survival instinct transformed into shared understanding. The sky had been gently divided, not into 12 neat segments, but into countless remembered moments, each tied to light in the darkness. By the time formal systems would one day emerge, the most important work was already done. Humans had learned to look up not just with fear, but with expectation. They had learned that the sky could be known, at least partially. And in dividing the heavens, they had unknowingly begun dividing themselves into roles, seasons, emotions, and stories that would one day shape the zodiac. The stars remained silent, but humanity had learned how to listen. As observation slowly turned into tradition, there came a moment in human history when the sky was no longer watched only by hunters, farmers, or wandering tribes. It began to be studied by those whose sole purpose was to understand it. This shift did not happen suddenly, and it did not happen everywhere at once. It unfolded quietly in the river valleys of ancient Mesopotamia, where the land was rich, unpredictable, and deeply dependent on forces beyond human control. Between the Tigris and the Euphrates, life was shaped by water that could give and destroy with equal indifference. Floods arrived without warning, sometimes nourishing the soil, sometimes sweeping away entire communities. In such a place, the desire to predict the future was not curiosity, it was survival. The sky, steady and repetitive above the chaos below, felt like the only reliable guide. Here, the stars were no longer just familiar patterns. They became messages. The people of Mesopotamia believed the heavens were the writing of the gods, etched into darkness for those patient enough to read. Every movement of light carried intention. Every shift held meaning. To ignore the sky was to risk angering forces far greater than any king. This belief gave rise to a new kind of observer. Priests and scholars climbed temple towers at night, standing above the noise of the city, closer to the stars and the rest of humanity. They watched carefully, recorded what they saw not in stories, but in symbols pressed into clay. The act of writing the sky down changed everything. What could be recorded could be compared. What could be compared could be systematized. Patterns emerged that went beyond seasons. Certain star groupings appeared along the same path year after year, following a narrow band across the sky. This band would later be known as the path of sun, though at the time it was simply recognized as special. The stars along it seemed to matter more. They aligned with eclipses, floods, and the rise and fall of kings. Slowly, this path became sacred. This was the birthplace of the zodiac, though it did not yet resemble the form we know today. It was not 12 neat signs, but a living record of omens. Each section of the sky along this path was associated with events on Earth. A war lost, a harvest failed, a ruler fell ill. Over time, connections were drawn, strengthened by repetition and belief. Unlike earlier sky watchers, Mesopotamian astrologers did not see the stars as reflections of human emotion. They saw them as commands. The sky did not describe people. It ruled them. Fate flowed downward from the heavens, shaping human life whether one understood it or not. This belief created both comfort and fear. Comfort, because suffering could be explained. Fear, because it could not be escaped. Within this system, the early forms of Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius began to take shape, not as personalities, but as powers. The section of the sky that would one day become Libra was associated with fairness, trade, and balance in society, long before it was symbolized by scales. It was a place in the heavens tied to judgment and order, reflecting the growing complexity of human law. Scorpio's region, darker in meaning, was linked to danger, disease, and hidden threats. In a land where scorpions were common and deadly, the symbolism was immediate and visceral. This part of the sky was feared, watched carefully for signs of disaster. When stars in this region behaved unexpectedly, people braced for loss. Sagittarius emerged as a figure of movement and force. Often associated with warriors, expansion, and divine wrath, this section of the sky represented action rather than reflection. It was linked to invasions, long journeys, and the will of the gods expressed through conquest or change. Where Scorpio warned, Sagittarius acted. What is striking is how little of this was personal. The zodiac was not about individuals finding themselves in the stars. It was about society surviving the whims of nature and divine power. Astrology belonged to temples and palaces, not to ordinary people. Knowledge of the sky was controlled, guarded, and respected. The recording of celestial events over centuries gave Mesopotamian astrology its authority. When a prediction came true, it reinforced belief. When it failed, it was reinterpreted, adjusted, refined. The system grew stronger through its flexibility. The sky itself never changed, but understanding of it did. As the zodiac took clearer shape, contrast became central to its structure. Balance was placed beside danger, order beside chaos, stillness beside motion. These contrasts reflected human experience as much as celestial observation. The sky became a story of opposing forces, locked in eternal rhythm. Yet even in this rigid system, mystery remained. Astrologers could describe patterns, but not origins. They could predict outcomes, but not meaning. The gods spoke through the stars, but never explained themselves. This silence gave astrology its power. The unknown always feels larger than the known. Over time, the zodiac was refined into segments, each with its own symbols, myths, and expectations. What began as scattered observations became a structured cosmic map. And from this map, later civilizations would borrow, adapt, and reinterpret. Mesopotamia did not create astrology as we know it today, but it gave it a spine. It transformed the sky from a shared wonder into an organized system of influence. It taught humanity to believe that time, fate, and identity were written above. Long after its cities crumbled into dust, this idea endured. The stars continued their slow movement, indifferent to human belief. But the framework had been set. The sky had been divided, named, and given authority. And from that division, the familiar signs, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, would one day emerge, carrying echoes of ancient fear, hope, and longing into every era that followed. For a long time, there was a silence where Libra should have been, not an absence of stars, but an absence of identity. In the ancient sky, this portion of the heavens existed without distinction, quietly folded into the body of something far more feared. The stars that would one day form the scales were once considered part of Scorpio, an extension of its claws, its reach, its danger. Balance had not yet earned its own place among the heavens. This forgotten state says more about humanity than it does about the sky. Early civilizations were deeply familiar with danger, death, and survival, but far less certain about fairness or equality. Power ruled, and strength decided outcomes. In such a world, The idea of balance was fragile, almost invisible. Why separate justice from fear when fear was a law? The stars themselves did nothing to demand separation. They remained exactly where they were, night after night, unchanged. It was human perception that blurred them together. The claws of Scorpio stretched wide, and everything between them felt dangerous. The sky mirrored the uncertainty of life on Earth. When survival is never guaranteed, subtle distinctions are easily lost. In Mesopotamian records, this region of the sky appears under names that suggest weighing and judgment, but not yet as a standalone identity. The concept existed, but it had not solidified. It hovered between meanings, much like the stars themselves, waiting for a culture ready to recognize it. The scales required a society that believed in order beyond force. They required courts, trade, negotiation, and shared rules. Until those ideas took root, Libra could not fully exist. This is why its birth is so quiet compared to other signs. It was not born from fear or awe, but from trust, a much rarer thing. As civilizations grew more complex, conflict no longer ended with simple dominance. Disputes arose that could not be solved with strength alone. Land, trade, alliances, and responsibility demanded fairness, or at least the appearance of it. Slowly, humans began to imagine balance as something sacred, something worth preserving. And as human thought changed, so did the sky. Astronomers and astrologers began to notice that this portion of the heavens felt different from Scorpio. It lacked venom. It lacked aggression. It carried a stillness, a pause. Where Scorpio warned of endings, this region suggested weighing, considering, deciding. The stars themselves did not move, but meaning shifted around them like a shadow changing with the sun. The separation was not dramatic. There was no single moment when someone declared the birth of Libra. Instead, the scales emerged gradually, through consensus, through use, through quiet acceptance. A symbol began to form. Not an animal, not a god, but an object. This alone made Libra unique. It represented an idea rather than a creature. The choice of scales was deeply human. Scales do not act on their own. They respond. They measure. They require patience and stillness. In a sky full of beasts and warriors, this was a radical shift. It suggested that the universe itself cared about fairness. In lived experience, Scorpio appears as grief, betrayal, illness, identity collapse, or profound emotional pain. This is a phase people fear most because it strips away illusion. Roles dissolve. Relationships end. Bodies change. Certainty disappears. Scorpio corresponds to moments when life forces confrontation with mortality, literal or symbolic, the death of a loved one, the end of a dream, the realization that time is finite. This phase is often accompanied by isolation, even when surrounded by others. Pain feels deeply personal, impossible to fully share. Yet this phase, as ancient cultures understood, is not meaningless. Scorpio is a stage where depth is forged. Before this, understanding is theoretical. After Scorpio, it is embodied. Psychologically, this phase corresponds to shadow integration. People encounter parts of themselves they did not want to see. Fear, anger, jealousy, vulnerability. Scorpio does not allow bypassing. It insists on truth. Many resist this phase, trying to rush past it. But unresolved Scorpio becomes stagnation, suppressed grief, unprocessed trauma. Scorpio must be lived through, not around. What often surprises people is that this phase, while devastating, carries a strange clarity. When everything falls away, what remains is real. Values sharpen. Priorities change. The person who emerges is not the same as the one who entered. Then comes Sagittarius, not as relief, but as reorientation. Sagittarius represents a phase of life where meaning begins to return. After loss, people begin asking larger questions. Why did this happen? What now? What matters? This phase often appears as movement, travel, study, spiritual searching, creative expression, sometimes literal movement, changing cities' careers, relationships, sometimes internal, changing beliefs, narratives, self-concept. Sagittarius corresponds to human capacity to transform pain into perspective. It does not erase what was lost. It contextualizes it. Suffering becomes part of a larger story rather than the end of it. Emotionally, this phase brings cautious optimism, not blind hope, but resilient hope. The understanding that while pain cannot be avoided, meaning can be created. Sagittarius teaches that life continues, and that growth often requires distance from what once defined us. In older age, this phase often becomes reflective. Elders tell stories. Wisdom is shared. Experience is distilled into insight. Sagittarius energy matures into guidance rather than restlessness. Importantly, this life cycle does not occur only once. People experience Libran adjustment, Scorpionic loss, and Sagittarian renewal many times. Each relationship, each major transition, each identity shift. This is why these signs feel so deeply human. They do not describe fate. They describe process. In childhood, Libra appears as learning fairness. Scorpio appears as first experiences of loss or disappointment. Sagittarius appears as curiosity and exploration. In adulthood, Libra appears as partnership and compromise. Scorpio appears as heartbreak, failure, or crisis for those who lived under its stars. This idea was both comforting and unsettling. Comforting because it implied order. Unsettling because it implied judgment. Balance means comparison. Comparison means accountability. Libra did not promise safety. It promised evaluation. This symbolic birth also marked a turning point in astrology itself. The zodiac began to reflect not just natural forces, but moral ones. The sky was no longer only about floods and famine. It was about choices, consequences, and responsibility. Even then, Libra remained delicate. Its identity was easily overshadowed by its darker neighbor. Scorpio loomed large, intense, dramatic. Libra whispered. It required attention to be understood. Many cultures continue to blur the two together, unwilling or unable to separate balance from danger. Yet over time, the scales endured. They became associated with law, diplomacy, and social harmony. Where Scorpio ruled secrets and endings, Libra ruled agreements and beginnings. This contrast added depth to the zodiac, introducing a softer transition between signs. What makes Libra's story unique is not its power, but its patience. It waited until humanity was ready. It emerged only when people began to believe that fairness mattered as much as strength. In this sense, Libra is not an ancient sign. It is a mature one. Looking back, the forgotten state of Libra feels almost symbolic. Balance is often unnoticed until it is lost. Justice is invisible until it is denied. The stars that form Libra were always there, shining quietly, waiting for eyes capable of seeing them for what they were. And when those eyes finally opened, the sky changed, not physically, but forever in meaning. Once the idea of the scales had finally taken shape in the human imagination, it did not remain confined to the sky. Balance, once recognized above, began to demand recognition below. This was not a sudden revolution, but a slow, careful shift in how societies understood themselves. The stars had offered a symbol, and humanity, cautiously, began to live up to it. In the earliest cities, balance was first felt through trade. Goods moved between hands. Weights were compared, and value needed to be agreed upon. Without balance, trade collapsed into theft or conflict. The simple act of weighing grain or metal carried a deeper meaning than survival alone. It suggested fairness, trust, and mutual respect. The scales above mirrored the scales below. As laws developed, the symbolism deepened. Justice was no longer a matter of strength or lineage alone. Rules were written, disputes were heard, and decisions were weighed. Even when fairness was imperfect, the idea of it became sacred. To judge was to balance. To rule was to measure responsibility against power. The sky seemed to approve of this shift, or at least to reflect it. Libra's association with balance was not just external. It touched something internal as well. People began to speak of harmony within the self, of moderating desire, of avoiding excess. The stars suggested that life, like the heavens, worked best when forces were held in equilibrium. Too much anger tipped the scales. Too much indulgence did the same. This idea resonated deeply because it was fragile. Balance is never permanent. It requires constant attention. The scales are always in motion, responding to the smallest change. In this way, Libra became a reminder rather than promise. It did not guarantee peace. It required effort. Across cultures, the symbol adapted but remained consistent. In Egypt, balance was tied to the heart, weighed against truth in the afterlife. In Greece, it was linked to divine order and proportion. In Rome, it became a tool of governance and law. Though the names and myths differed, the core idea remained unchanged. Balance was sacred. The placement of Libra in the sky reinforced its meaning. Positioned between Virgo and Scorpio, it served as a pause between purity and intensity, a moment of decision before transformation. This placement was not accidental in interpretation. Even if it was in astronomy, humans saw what they needed to see. Emotionally, Libra softened the zodiac. It introduced calm where there had been tension. It suggested that not every challenge required conflict, and not every ending required destruction. There was another way, a quieter one, yet this quietness often made Libra underestimated. In a world drawn to power and drama, balance can seem passive. But Libra's strength lies in restraint. It holds opposing forces without breaking. It listens. It considers. It waits. The stars themselves reinforce this lesson. Libra's constellation is subtle, easy to overlook. It does not dominate the sky. It does not demand attention. And yet, once noticed, it changes how the surrounding stars are perceived. It brings context. Over time, astrology began to reflect this deeper understanding. Libra was no longer just a segment of the sky, but a lens through which human behavior was interpreted. People born under its influence were thought to seek harmony, avoid extremes, and value connection. Whether true or not, the symbolism offered comfort. It suggested that some souls were drawn naturally toward peace. But Libra also carried a quiet warning. Too much balance can become indecision. The scales can tip endlessly without settling. The desire to please can lead to loss of self. This duality made Libra human. It was not an ideal, it was a challenge. In the flow of the zodiac, Libra represents a breath. After effort and growth, before descent and transformation, there's a moment to pause, to reflect, to weigh what has been gained and what must be released. This moment is fleeting but essential. The human obsession with balance is not accidental. It arises from living in a world of extremes. The stars offered a symbol that acknowledged the struggle without pretending it could be resolved permanently. Libra does not end conflict. It manages it. As centuries passed, the scales remained. Empires fell, religions shifted, sciences evolved, but the idea endured. Balance continued to matter, both in the sky and within the human heart. The stars had given humanity a metaphor powerful enough to survive time. And so, every time a night sky brings Libra into view, it quietly reminds us of something ancient and unfinished. That harmony is not found, it is maintained. That justice is not given, it is weighed. And that even in a universe filled with chaos and change, there is always a moment where balance is possible, if only for a while. When Libra's quiet moment of balance fades, the sky does not remain gentle for long. Almost imperceptibly at first, the tone shifts. The air feels heavier, the darkness deeper. This is where Scorpio waits, not as a sudden threat, but as an awareness that something hidden has always been nearby. If Libra teaches humanity how to weigh and consider, Scorpio teaches what happens when those scales are tipped too far. From the earliest times, Scorpions inspired fear that was immediate and visceral, small, silent, and often unseen until it was too late. They embodied danger without warning. A single sting could mean suffering or death. In ancient lands where scorpions were common, people learned to respect them, not out of admiration but necessity. It is no accident that when humans looked to the stars for symbols of power and peril, they found Scorpio waiting for them. The stars that form Scorpio are striking. Unlike the subtlety of Libra, this constellation announces itself. Its curved shape, glowing heart, and extended tail feel intentional, almost alive. Ancient observers did not struggle to imagine meaning here. The shape itself seemed to suggest a creature poised to strike. In the human mind, recognition quickly became reverence and fear. Scorpio was never a gentle symbol. From the beginning, it was associated with endings, death, decay, punishment, and the unseen forces that operate beyond human control. In myth, scorpions were often sent by gods as instruments of divine justice. They punished arrogance, disobedience, and hubris. To be stung was not random, it was deserved. This belief gave Scorpio a moral weight. It was not just about fear of death, but fear of consequence. Where Libra weighed actions, Scorpio delivered the result. It was a dark continuation of the story, the moment when choice became irreversible. This made Scorpio both terrifying and necessary. In Mesopotamian traditions, Scorpio was linked to gates of the underworld and guardians of forbidden thresholds. It stood between worlds, marking the boundary between life and death, known and unknown. This positioning reinforced its role as a liminal force. Scorpio was not chaos. It was transition to destruction. The emotional intensity of Scorpio arises from this threshold quality. It represents the point where things can no longer remain as they are. Secrets surface. Truths emerge painfully. Illusions dissolve. Transformation begins, but not gently. Something must die for something else to take its place. Unlike Libra's careful balance, Scorpio offers no compromise. It cuts cleanly and deeply. This finality frightened ancient cultures, but it also fascinated them. There is a strange comfort in knowing that endings have meaning. Scorpio provided that meaning, even when it was brutal. The stars themselves seem to echo this intensity. Antares, the heart of Scorpio, burns red in the night sky, often mistaken for Mars. Ancient observers associated its color with blood, war, and passion. This single star amplified Scorpio's reputation, reinforcing the idea that this region of the sky was dangerous, powerful, and alive. Yet Scorpio was not purely destructive. In many traditions, it also symbolized protection. A scorpion's sting, while deadly, was precise. It did not strike without purpose. This distinction mattered. Scorpio punished excess, not balance. It followed Libra for a reason. Only after judgment came consequence. Psychologically, Scorpio reflects humanity's relationship with fear itself. Fear of death, fear of betrayal, fear of losing control. By placing these fears in the sky, humans could confront them at a distance. The constellation became a container for darkness, allowing people to acknowledge it without being consumed. This is why Scorpio has always been tied to secrecy. It governs what is hidden, buried, or unspoken. In a world where survival often depended on knowing when to stay silent, Scorpio represented the power of restraint as much as aggression. Not all threats announced themselves. In later astrology, Scorpio would become associated with passion, obsession, and emotional depth. These traits are extensions of its original symbolism. Intensity, when turned inward, becomes feeling. When turned outward, it becomes action. Scorpio contains both. The transition from Libra to Scorpio is one of the most dramatic in the zodiac, not because the stars change, but because the story does. Harmony gives way to confrontation. Reflection gives way to reckoning. The sky moves from quiet consideration to unavoidable truth. Scorpio teaches that balance cannot last forever. Sooner or later, something must be faced. Ignored shadows grow darker. Delayed endings become more painful. The scorpion waits patiently, but it always waits. In the ancient imagination, Scorpio was not evil. It was honest. It did not pretend that life was fair or gentle. It acknowledged suffering as part of existence. This honesty made it frightening, but also real. As the night deepens and Scorpio rises, the sky seems to ask a different kind of question. Not what should be done, but what must be done. Not how to maintain peace, but what must be sacrificed to achieve transformation. And in that question lies Scorpio's enduring power. As Scorpio's presence settled into the collective imagination, it did not remain confined to silent observation of the stars. Human minds, always eager to give form to fear, began to weave stories around this dark shape in the sky. Myths arose not to soften Scorpio, but to explain it, to give its danger a face, a motive, a reason. In doing so, ancient cultures transformed Scorpio from a constellation into a force that could intervene in human fate. One of the most enduring stories linked to Scorpio comes from ancient Greece, where the scorpion was not born of chance, but sent with purpose. Orion, the great hunter, boasted that no creature could defeat him. His confidence swelled into arrogance, and in challenging the natural order, he offended the gods. In response, a scorpion was sent to humble him. Small, low to the ground, and nearly invisible, it struck where strength meant nothing. Orion fell, not to a greater beast, but to something overlooked. This story carried a quiet warning. Power does not make one invincible. Strength invites challenge. Scorpio, in this myth, was not cruel. It was corrective. The god did not destroy Orion with lightning or fire. They used something precise, something inevitable. And when both were placed among the stars, they were set on opposite sides of the sky, eternally chasing, yet never meeting again. Even in the heavens, consequence created distance. Across other cultures, similar themes emerged. In Mesopotamian mythology, scorpion beings guarded sacred thresholds, standing watch at the gates of the underworld. They were neither fully alive nor fully dead, existing in a space between. Their role was not to attack, but to prevent passage. To cross them without permission was to invite destruction. Scorpio, here, was not a predator. It was a boundary. These myths framed Scorpio as an enforcer of cosmic law, not a villain but an agent. It appeared when lines were crossed, when balance was violated, when arrogance or ignorance threatened order. Fear, in this context, was educational. It taught restraint. The imagery of the scorpion itself reinforced this lesson. Unlike lions or serpents, scorpions do not chase. They wait. They hide. Their power lies in timing, not force. In myth, this translated into sudden consequences that felt inevitable rather than accidental. Scorpio does not warn loudly. It reminds after the fact. In Egyptian symbolism, the scorpion was associated with protection as well as death. The goddess Serket, often depicted with a scorpion, was both a healer and a guardian. She protected the dead on their journey to the afterlife and guarded against venomous harm. This dual role softened Scorpio's image, suggesting that danger and protection are not opposites, but reflections of one another. The scorpion, in this light, became a symbol of controlled power. Venom could kill, but in small doses it could heal. The same force that destroyed could also preserve. Scorpio myths often played with this tension, reminding listeners that what saves can also harm. In many traditions, Scorpio was tied to punishment for moral failure. It appeared when humans broke sacred rules, disrespected gods, or acted without humility. But punishment was never random. It was always connected to behavior. This reinforced a worldview where the universe responded to human action, even if that response was delayed. The fear surrounding Scorpio myths served a purpose. It discouraged excess, arrogance, and recklessness. It taught that not all dangers are visible and not all justice is immediate. Some consequences arrive quietly when least expected. At the same time, Scorpio myths acknowledge something uncomfortable, that darkness is part of life. Death is not an interruption. It is a transition. Scorpio did not exist to end stories, but to move them forward through loss. This is why Scorpio often appears in myths involving rebirth. The scorpion stings, the old self dies, and something new emerges. Though painful, this process was seen as necessary. Without endings, there could be no renewal. As these stories were passed down, Scorpio's symbolism deepened. It became associated with secrets, hidden knowledge, and the unseen forces shaping reality. Those who understood Scorpio were thought to possess insight others lacked. They saw beneath surfaces, into motives and truths that frightened most people. This made Scorpio both feared and respected. In many cultures, knowledge of Scorpio's mysteries was reserved for priests, shamans, and initiates. To understand Scorpio was to walk close to danger, but also close to power. In the flow of myth, Scorpio often appears after moments of pride or imbalance. It restores order through disruption. It does not negotiate. It acts. These stories, whispered around fires and carved into stone, gave Scorpio its enduring role, not merely as a sign of death, but as a reminder that life's most profound changes come through confrontation with the shadow. And so, when Scorpio rises in the sky, it carries with it centuries of warning and wisdom, a quiet message passed down through myth, that power demands humility, that endings shape beginnings, and that sometimes the smallest forces bring the greatest transformations. Over time, something subtle began to shift in the way Scorpio was understood. The fear never disappeared, but it deepened into something more complex. People began to realize that what Scorpio represented was not simply destruction, but a process, one that could not be avoided, only experienced. Darkness, when faced rather than feared, revealed a strange and uncomfortable truth. It was not empty. It was fertile. In the natural world, decay is never meaningless. Rot feeds new growth. Death makes space for life. Ancient observers, who lived close to the rhythms of soil and seasons, could not ignore this reality. Crops died back before returning stronger. Animals shed old skins. Rivers flooded, destroyed, and then renewed the land. Slowly, Scorpio's association with death began to intertwine with renewal. This understanding did not soften Scorpio into something gentle, but it made it purposeful. The sting was no longer seen as an end, but as an initiation, a crossing point after which nothing could return to its previous state. Scorpio marked a moment of irreversible change. In many mystery traditions, especially those centered on transformation and hidden knowledge, Scorpio became a symbol of initiation. To pass through its influence was to confront fear directly. Those who survived were changed, not necessarily stronger, but more aware. The Scorpion did not kill indiscriminately. It tested. This is why Scorpio is so often linked to secrecy. Transformation does not happen in public. It happens in silence, in isolation, in moments of internal struggle. The ancient world understood that true change could not be witnessed from the outside. It had to be endured. The symbolism of the underworld played a crucial role here. Descending into darkness was not about punishment. It was about retrieval. Myths across cultures speak of heroes entering shadowed realms to recover lost truths, loved ones, or parts of themselves. Scorpio guarded the entrance to these inner worlds. It was not the destination, but the gatekeeper. Emotionally, this reframing changed everything. Fear gave way to reverence. Pain became meaningful. Loss became transformative. Scorpio no longer represented an enemy to be avoided, but a force to be respected. You could not bargain with it, but you could learn from it. Astrologically, this shift mirrored changes in human self-awareness. As societies evolved, people became more interested in the inner world, motives, desires, guilt, and longing. Scorpio became the keeper of these depths. It ruled what was buried, suppressed, or forbidden, not because these things were evil, but because they were powerful. The Scorpion itself embodies this paradox. It is armored yet vulnerable, dangerous yet cautious. It survives in harsh conditions by conserving energy and striking only when necessary. In this way, Scorpio became a symbol of emotional endurance, the ability to survive darkness without being consumed by it. This is also why Scorpio is associated with rebirth. In many traditions, the Scorpion transforms into the eagle or phoenix, creatures that rise after destruction. The message is clear. Transformation is painful, but it leads to elevation. One cannot rise without first descending. This idea resonated deeply with people who had endured loss, trauma, or profound change. Scorpio offered a narrative that made suffering intelligible. It suggested that pain was not random, but part of a larger cycle. This did not erase grief, but it gave it context. Over time, Scorpio's image expanded to include healing. Venom, when understood, can become medicine. Knowledge of danger leads to protection. Those who survived Scorpio's trials were thought to possess insight others lacked. They could guide, warn, and heal. In later interpretations, Scorpio became associated with psychology, introspection, and emotional truth. It ruled the unseen currents beneath polite conversation. It asked questions others avoided. It exposed lies, especially the ones people told themselves. This made Scorpio uncomfortable, but invaluable. Growth rarely feels safe. Transformation often feels like loss before it feels like renewal. Scorpio holds space for this process without apology. The contrast with Libra becomes clearer here. Libra seeks harmony by balancing forces. Scorpio seeks truth by stripping away illusion. One pauses. The other plunges. Together, they form a complete movement, from consideration to consequence, from surface to depth. In the quiet hours of night, when Scorpio dominates the sky, its message is not one of fear, but of honesty. It invites reflection on what must be released, what must end, and what can be reborn. It does not promise comfort, but it offers clarity. This reframing allowed Scorpio to endure across centuries without losing relevance. As human understanding of the mind deepened, Scorpio symbolism only grew richer. It became a guide through grief, obsession, passion, and renewal. In the end, Scorpio is not the darkness itself. It is the passage through it. A reminder that transformation is not gentle, but it is necessary, and that beyond every ending, something waits to begin again. After the depths of Scorpio, the sky begins to feel different. The darkness does not disappear, but it loosens its grip. There is a subtle shift, as if something has survived a descent and is now looking outward once more. This is where Sagittarius emerges, not abruptly, but with a sense of momentum, like a breath taken after being held for too long. In the ancient imagination, Sagittarius was impossible to ignore. Unlike the scales or the scorpion, it did not suggest stillness or concealment. It suggested motion. Half human and half beast, it embodied the tension between instinct and intention. The archer stands poised, bow drawn, eyes fixed on something far beyond the immediate horizon. Even in the stars, it feels restless. This restlessness mattered. After Scorpio's transformation, humanity needed a symbol of direction. It was not enough to survive change. One had to move forward. Sagittarius became that forward pull, the reminder that life does not end in the underworld. It continues, searching for meaning beyond pain. The earliest associations of Sagittarius were tied to hunting, travel, and warfare. The bow was a tool of distance, allowing humans to reach what they could not touch. This made Sagittarius a symbol of expansion. Where Scorpio plunged inward, Sagittarius aimed outward. It asked not what must be faced, but where to go next. In Mesopotamian traditions, figures resembling Sagittarius were often depicted as divine warriors, enforcing the will of the gods across vast territories. This reinforced the idea that Sagittarius was not content with boundaries. It crossed them. It carried divine intention beyond the familiar. Greek mythology later shaped Sagittarius into the centaur, most notably Chiron, a being of wisdom rather than savagery. Unlike other centaurs, who represented excess and chaos, Chiron was a teacher, healer, and guide. This distinction was crucial. It reframed Sagittarius as a seeker of knowledge rather than a bringer of violence. The centaur's dual nature reflects humanity's own conflict. The animal body represents instinct, desire, and survival. The human torso represents thought, ethics, and aspiration. Sagittarius exists in the tension between these halves, aiming higher while still rooted in the physical world. The bow and arrow deepen this symbolism. An arrow must be pulled backward before it can be released. The archer must pause, aim, and then let go. This mirrors the emotional journey from Scorpio. One must process the past before moving forward. Sagittarius does not deny what came before. It uses it as momentum. Unlike Scorpio's secrecy, Sagittarius is open. It thrives in wide spaces, open roads, distant lands. Ancient cultures associated it with travel, exploration, and the unknown. It ruled not just physical journeys, but intellectual ones as well. Philosophy, teaching, and belief systems fell under its domain. This made Sagittarius deeply hopeful. It suggested that meaning could be found beyond suffering. That answers existed, even if they were far away. The sky, after all, had always been a place of distant lights. Sagittarius encouraged humans to reach for them. Emotionally, Sagittarius represents optimism born from experience. Not naive hope, but hope that has survived darkness. It carries scars, but it does not dwell on them. Instead, it looks ahead, trusting that movement itself is healing. The placement of Sagittarius after Scorpio in the zodiac reinforces this narrative. Transformation without purpose can become despair. Sagittarius provides that purpose. It gives direction to change, turning pain into wisdom and loss into motivation. In the stars, Sagittarius appears near the center of the Milky Way, the densest, most mysterious part of our galaxy. Ancient observers did not know this scientifically, but they sense its significance. This region of the sky felt rich, crowded, full of potential. Sagittarius, aiming toward this cosmic heart, seemed to seek ultimate truth. This association elevated Sagittarius beyond mere adventure. It became a spiritual seeker. Its journeys were not just across land, but across belief. It questioned God, traditions, and assumptions. It sought understanding rather than certainty. Yet Sagittarius is not without danger. Its desire for freedom can become recklessness. Its confidence can become dogma. In aiming far, it can overlook what is close. This duality keeps Sagittarius human. Like the arrow, its flight is powerful but irreversible. The contrast with Scorpio remains essential. Scorpio demands depth. Sagittarius demands breadth. One dives, the other climbs. Together, they form a complete arc of experience, descent followed by ascent. As Sagittarius rises in the sky, the emotional tone lightens. The heaviness of Scorpio gives way to possibility. The night feels wider. The future feels open. Even uncertainty becomes exciting rather than frightening. In this way, Sagittarius serves as a promise that after every ending, there is a journey. That knowledge grows through movement, and that the stars, once silent witnesses to fear and survival, now point towards something more, a horizon still waiting to be explored. What truly separates Sagittarius from all that comes before it is not movement alone, but intention. The archer does not wander aimlessly. There is a target, even if it cannot be clearly seen. This distinction transforms travel into a journey, motion into meaning. Sagittarius is not satisfied with simply going somewhere else. It wants to understand why it is going at all. In the ancient world, travel was dangerous and often irreversible. To leave home meant accepting uncertainty, loss, and the possibility of never returning. Those who traveled did so for reasons that mattered deeply: trade, survival, pilgrimage, or knowledge. Sagittarius absorbed this gravity. Its symbol is not a running animal, but a figure who pauses, aims, and then releases. Every journey carries consequence. This is why Sagittarius became associated with wisdom rather than chaos. It is easy to mistake motion for freedom, but Sagittarius teaches that freedom comes from direction. The arrow does not fly randomly. It is guided by focus, shaped by tension, and released with trust. Philosophers and teachers fell under Sagittarius's influence because they, too, aim beyond the immediate. They question the nature of reality, morality, and existence itself. In many ancient cultures, those who sought knowledge were wanderers, moving from place to place, gathering ideas, exchanging perspectives. Sagittarius became the patron of this search. The archer's upward aim is especially important. Unlike animals that hunt across the ground, Sagittarius lifts its gaze. The target is often symbolic rather than literal. Truth, meaning, enlightenment, these are distant and abstract, yet deeply desired. The arrow becomes a metaphor for belief. This association gave Sagittarius a spiritual dimension. It was not content with inherited answers. It wanted experience. This made it restless, sometimes unsettling to societies built on tradition, yet it also drove progress. Every expansion of knowledge began with someone willing to leave the familiar. Emotionally, Sagittarius represents hope that is learned from pain. It follows Scorpio not to erase suffering, but to transcend it. The sky demanded precision, and medieval astrologers responded with devotion. Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius took on new shades of meaning during this time. Libra became closely tied to medical balance. Medieval medicine was built on the theory of humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Health depended on equilibrium. Illness signaled imbalance. Libra scales mirrored this belief perfectly. Healing, like justice, required careful adjustment rather than force. Scorpio's influence deepened in the context of disease and death. Plague, in particular, gave Scorpio's symbolism a terrifying immediacy. Sudden illness, hidden infection, unseen causes. These echoed Scorpio's themes of secrecy and transformation. Death was no longer abstract. It was personal, intimate, unavoidable. Yet even here, Scorpio was not only feared. It represented the process of decay that made rebirth possible. Compost nourished soil. Death cleared space for life. Medieval thinkers, deeply influenced by Christian theology, saw a transformation everywhere. Scorpio's darkness became a passage rather than a void. Sagittarius, meanwhile, was associated with movement of a different kind. Physical travel was limited and dangerous, but intellectual and spiritual journeys flourished. Pilgrimages, quests for relics, and the pursuit of sacred knowledge all fell under Sagittarius's domain. The archer aimed not at land, but at truth. The medieval worldview blended astrology with medicine, religion, and natural philosophy. The stars influenced bodily health, emotional temperament, and even spiritual disposition. This holistic approach made astrology practical. It was consulted before surgeries, journeys, and major decisions. Despite this integration, fear lingered. Astrology walked a careful line between accepted science and suspected heresy. Practitioners avoided claims of absolute prediction. They spoke instead of tendencies, influences, and probabilities. The stars inclined, they did not command. This caution shaped medieval astrology's tone. It was softer, more contemplative. Charts were not declarations of fate, but tools for understanding balance and imbalance. Libra scales were central here. They symbolized moderation, the virtue most praised in medieval ethics. Scorpio's association with secrecy also made it the sign of hidden knowledge. Alchemy, with its obsession with transformation, death, and rebirth, resonated deeply with Scorpio symbolism. Lead into gold, ignorance into wisdom, flesh into spirit. The process mattered more than the outcome. Sagittarius, in contrast, represented faith and vision. Its arrow pointed beyond the material world. The archer aimed toward heaven, toward divine understanding. This aligned perfectly with medieval spirituality, which saw earthly life as a journey toward salvation. The rhythm of medieval life encouraged introspection. Long nights, limited distraction, and constant uncertainty turned attention inward. Astrology became a companion in this inward turn. It offered a language for understanding suffering, hope, and purpose. Where Scorpio asks what must be confronted, Sagittarius asks what can be learned. This shift transforms trauma into teaching. The centaur Chiron embodies this perfectly. Wounded and unable to heal himself, he nonetheless became a healer and mentor to others. His suffering did not end his journey. It shaped it. Sagittarius, in this sense, carries wisdom earned through endurance. The arrow itself carries a lesson in restraint. To shoot, one must first pull back. This tension mirrors life's challenges. Growth often requires discomfort. Progress demands patience. Sagittarius understands that advancement is not immediate, but it is intentional. This is why Sagittarius is associated with honesty. The arrow flies straight, or not at all. There is little room for deception. Sagittarius prefers truth, even when it is uncomfortable. This bluntness can feel harsh, but it is rooted in a desire for clarity. In the flow of the zodiac, Sagittarius opens space. After intensity and introspection, it offers perspective. It reminds humanity that the world is larger than personal pain, that suffering, while real, is not the end of the story. The sky itself reinforces this message. Sagittarius occupies a region rich with stars, dust, and mystery. It feels expansive, full. Ancient observers sense abundance here. The night seemed deeper, wider, more alive. Sagittarius did not promise answers. It promised possibilities. Yet Sagittarius is not about arrival. The arrow rarely reaches its target in myth. The value lies in the act of aiming. The journey matters more than the destination. This philosophy softened humanity's relationship with uncertainty. Not knowing became acceptable, even exciting. This idea was radical. Earlier signs focused on survival, order, and consequence. Sagittarius introduced meaning as a pursuit rather than a possession. It suggested that life's purpose might not be fixed, but discovered. This makes Sagittarius deeply human. It reflects the eternal search that defines our species. The urge to ask questions, to explore, to reach beyond what is given. It is the part of us that looks at the horizon and wonders what lies beyond. The contrast with Scorpio is essential here. Scorpio dives into the depths to uncover truth. Sagittarius climbs out, carrying that truth forward. One transforms internally, the other transforms externally. As the archer takes aim in the sky, It invites the observer to do the same, not with certainty, but with courage, to choose a direction, to accept that the journey will change them, and to trust that movement itself is a form of healing. In this way, Sagittarius does not offer rest, but renewal. It reminds us that after darkness, there is distance. After endings, there is a road. And somewhere ahead, even if unseen, there is meaning waiting to be pursued. As the ideas carried by Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius travel beyond their earliest homes, they did not remain unchanged. When Greek culture encountered the star knowledge of older civilizations, it did what it always did best. It told stories. The sky, once a ledger of omens and survival, slowly transformed into a stage where gods, heroes, and monsters played out eternal dramas. This shift did not erase earlier meanings, but wrapped them in narrative, making the zodiac more human, more memorable, and more intimate. The Greeks did not look at the stars and see commands from distant gods. They saw reflections of human behavior, magnified to cosmic scale. Strength, jealousy, pride, sacrifice, wisdom. These traits were written into the sky through myth. Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius were no longer just forces. They became characters. Libra's transformation under Greek influence was subtle but profound. The scales became associated with Themis, the goddess of divine law and order, and later with Astrea, the virgin of justice who left Earth when humanity became too corrupt. In these stories, Libra represented not just balance, but the loss of it. Justice was something once present, now distant, preserved only in the sky. This added a quiet sadness to Libra's symbolism. Balance was no longer guaranteed. It was something remembered, something to be restored. Scorpio's myth was sharpened and immortalized through Orion's story. Orion, the great hunter, represented unchecked confidence. He was skilled, powerful, admired, and dangerously arrogant. The scorpion sent to defeat him was small, unglamorous, and underestimated. This contrast made the lesson unforgettable. No matter how strong someone becomes, they remain vulnerable to forces they ignore. The gods did not destroy Orion with grandeur. They humbled him with precision. By placing Orion and Scorpio on opposite sides of the sky, the Greeks added an eternal rhythm to the lesson. When Scorpio rises, Orion falls. When Orion returns, Scorpio disappears. The sky itself enacts consequence. Pride gives way to punishment, and punishment recedes, allowing renewal. This visual storytelling embedded morality into the heavens. Sagittarius, through Greek myth, gained depth through the figure Chiron. Unlike the wild centaurs who symbolized excess and lack of control, Chiron was wise, disciplined, and compassionate. He taught heroes, healed wounds, and understood suffering intimately. Wounded himself and unable to die, Chiron embodied the paradox of wisdom born from pain. Through Chiron, Sagittarius became more than an archer. It became a teacher. The bow was no longer just a weapon. It was a tool of focus. The arrow was knowledge released into the world. This reframing aligned perfectly with Sagittarius' role after Scorpio. Having endured transformation, one gains insight worth sharing. Greek mythology softened the harshness of earlier astrology by humanizing it. Fate was still powerful, but it was intertwined with choice. Characters made decisions, suffered consequences, learned lessons. The stars reflected this complexity. They no longer dictated blindly, they illustrated. This shift also changed how people related to the zodiac. Astrology became personal. Individuals could see themselves in the myths. A person born under Scorpio might recognize their own intensity and depth. Someone under Libra might feel the pull toward fairness and harmony. Sagittarius individuals might feel restless, curious, driven to seek meaning. Importantly, Greek influence introduced the idea that the zodiac told a continuous story. The signs were no longer isolated symbols, but chapters in a larger narrative. Libra judged, Scorpio punished. Sagittarius sought understanding. Each followed logically from the last. The aesthetic beauty of Greek storytelling ensured the zodiac's survival. Myths were easier to remember than omens. Stories traveled farther than charts. As Greek culture spread through trade and conquest, so did its version of the sky. Yet even as myths took center stage, the stars themselves remained unchanged. This tension between fixed heavens and evolving stories gave astrology flexibility. Each generation could reinterpret the myths without altering the sky. Greek philosophers added another layer. Thinkers like Plato saw the heavens as a reflection of ideal forms, perfect, eternal, ordered. Libra represented cosmic balance. Scorpio represented necessary destruction. Sagittarius represented the soul's ascent toward truth. Astrology became philosophical, not just mythological. This blending of myth and thought gave the zodiac its enduring richness. It could be moral, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual all at once. The sky became a map not just of time, but a human experience. By the time Roman culture inherited these ideas, the zodiac was already deeply humanized. The Greeks had given stars faces, voices, and stories. They had turned ancient fears and hopes into narratives that could be told at night, remembered in sleep, and passed down across centuries. In this way, Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius were no longer distant symbols. They became companions in humanity's ongoing attempt to understand itself, etched into the sky, but alive in story. When Roman culture absorbed the myths and star knowledge of Greece, it did not simply preserve them, it organized them. Where the Greeks told stories, the Romans built systems. Where Greek astrology explored meaning, Roman astrology demanded utility. The sky, once a realm of myth and philosophy, became an instrument of authority. The Romans lived in a world defined by order, hierarchy, and expansion. Roads were straight. Laws were written. Power was centralized. It was inevitable that their interpretation of the heavens would reflect this mindset. Astrology shifted from storytelling toward structure. The zodiac became less poetic and more administrative, a cosmic framework that mirrored the empire itself. Libra, in Roman thought, took on renewed importance. Balance was no longer an abstract ideal or a lost golden age. It became a political necessity. Justice, law, and governance were central to Roman identity. Courts operated under codified rules. Citizenship carried rights and obligations. The scales in the sky felt like validation. The universe itself appeared to endorse Roman order. Roman astrologers associated Libra with stability and civic harmony. It symbolized the ability to maintain equilibrium within a vast and diverse empire. Too much force led to rebellion. Too much leniency led to disorder. Balance was survival. Libra was no longer quiet. It was strategic. Scorpio, by contrast, represented what happened when balance failed. Romans understood punishment deeply. Discipline was harsh. Consequences severe. Scorpio's symbolism of retribution, secrecy, and transformation fit neatly into this worldview. It became associated with betrayal, political intrigue, and the hidden dangers within power structures. In an empire built on conquest, Scorpio also symbolized control violence. The Roman military did not strike impulsively. It planned, waited, and then acted decisively. This mirrored the Scorpion's nature. Swift, precise, final. Scorpio was not chaos. It was enforcement. Sagittarius, in Roman interpretation, embodied expansion. The archer was no longer just a seeker of truth, but a force pushing borders outward. Rome's identity was tied to movement. Legions marching, territories absorbed, cultures reshaped. Sagittarius represented ambition aligned with destiny. Yet even here, the Romans maintained control. Sagittarius was not wild exploration, but purposeful expansion. The arrow flew where it was commanded to fly. Movement served empire, not curiosity. One of the most profound Roman contributions to astrology was its integration into political legitimacy. Emperors consulted astrologers. Birth charts were analyzed. Celestial signs were interpreted as approval or warning from the cosmos itself. Power was no longer just inherited or seized. It was written in the stars. Libra's association with justice made it particularly appealing. An emperor ruling under Libra's influence could claim fairness and balance as divine qualities. Scorpio justified ruthless action when necessary. Sagittarius validated conquest as destiny. The zodiac became propaganda. Time itself was reorganized through the sky. Calendars were refined. Festivals aligned with celestial events. Astrology helped regulate agricultural cycles, military campaigns, and religious observances. The heavens were no longer distant. They governed daily life. This formalization had consequences. Astrology became less personal and more institutional. Knowledge of the stars was centralized, controlled by educated elites. The sky belonged to the state as much as to the people. Yet despite this rigidity, Roman astrology did not lose its emotional power. The myths remained, but they were disciplined. Gods became symbols of order rather than unpredictable forces. Fate became something that could be managed, if not avoided. Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius formed a particularly potent sequence in Roman thought. Balance led to judgment. Judgment led to action. Action led to expansion. This mirrored Rome's own narrative. Civilization imposed through order and force, justified by destiny. There was comfort in this structure. In a world of uncertainty, the idea that the universe followed rules was reassuring. Even suffering had a place. Even loss served a greater order. But this worldview also carried tension. When the empire began to fracture, astrology reflected that strain. Scorpio's themes of decay and transformation felt closer. Libra's balance felt harder to maintain. Sagittarius's expansion slowed, then reversed. Astrology, once a tool of confidence, became a mirror of anxiety. The sky remained ordered, but the world below wavered. This disconnect planted seeds of doubt. As Christianity rose, Roman astrology faced new challenges. The idea of divine will shifted. Fate was questioned. The stars, once authorities, were reinterpreted as creations rather than controllers. Yet the structure remained. Even as belief systems changed, the zodiac endured. Its symbols were too deeply woven into culture to disappear. Libra still meant justice. Scorpio still meant consequence. Sagittarius still meant direction. The Roman legacy lies not in myth, but in endurance. By systematizing astrology, Rome ensured its survival. The zodiac became portable, adaptable, capable of crossing centuries and cultures. Long after the empire fell, its version of the sky remained. The stars continued their paths, indifferent to human power. But the structure imposed upon them endured, shaping how future generations would interpret the heavens. In this way, Rome did not just rule the world, it organized the sky. And through Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius, it projected its values upward, believing, perhaps desperately, that the universe itself was on its side. As the Roman world slowly gave way to new beliefs, the relationship between humanity and the stars began to fracture. What had once been a source of authority and reassurance became a subject of suspicion. Astrology did not disappear, but retreated into shadow, carried with its centuries of accumulated meaning. The sky remained unchanged, but the way people were allowed to interpret it was no longer free. With the rise of monotheistic religions, especially Christianity, the idea that fate was written in the stars became deeply uncomfortable. If a single, all-powerful God governed the universe, then celestial bodies could not be allowed to share that power. The stars were redefined not as guides, but as creations. Beautiful, yes, but silent. To listen too closely to them was to risk heresy. This shift introduced fear where there had once been confidence. Astrology, once practiced openly in temples and courts, now existed in tension with religious doctrine. Some theologians argued that studying the heavens was acceptable as long as it remained descriptive, not predictive. Others condemned it entirely, seeing in it a rival source of truth. Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius were caught in this transition. Their symbols endured, but their meanings were reshaped. Libra's association with justice aligned uncomfortably well with divine judgment. Scorpio's themes of punishment and consequence felt dangerously close to ideas of sin and damnation. Sagittarius' search for truth could easily be framed as spiritual wandering or spiritual rebellion. The fear was not of the stars themselves, but of human interpretation. Astrology suggested that humans could access hidden knowledge, predict outcomes, and understand fate. This threatened the authority of religious institutions. If the future could be read in the sky, what role remained for faith? As a result, astrology became selective. Certain aspects were tolerated, others suppressed. Observing the heavens for calendars, agriculture, and navigation remained acceptable. Predicting personal destiny did not. The zodiac survived by adapting, becoming quieter, more symbolic, less overtly prophetic. During this time, knowledge fragmented. Ancient texts were lost, hidden, or translated imperfectly. Astrology persisted in monasteries, libraries, and private circles, often disguised as astronomy or philosophy. The sky was studied, but its voice was muted. Scorpio's association with secrecy grew stronger in this era. Hidden knowledge, forbidden texts, and whispered traditions all fell under its shadow. Astrology itself became a Scorpionic art, practiced discreetly, protected from exposure. Libra, too, changed. Justice shifted from cosmic balance to moral judgment. The scales were no longer held by abstract forces, but by God. Balance became obedience. Harmony meant alignment with doctrine. The sky's role in judgment diminished. Sagittarius's influence was perhaps the most conflicted. Its restless search for meaning could lead either to deeper faith or dangerous questioning. Philosophers, scholars, and mystics walked a narrow line. Curiosity was praised when it supported belief, condemned when it challenged it. Despite these tensions, astrology refused to vanish. People continued to look to the stars during uncertainty. Plagues, wars, and natural disasters reignited old questions. When suffering lacked explanation, the sky once again felt meaningful. Astrology's survival during this period depended on blending. It absorbed religious language. Fate became providence. Cycles became divine order. The zodiac was reinterpreted as a reflection of God's design rather than an independent force. This reframing allowed astrology to persist without direct confrontation. The stars no longer controlled destiny. They revealed God's plan. Whether this distinction truly satisfied theologians mattered less than the fact that people continued to seek meaning above. Emotionally, this era added weight to zodiac. Fear of punishment, hope for salvation, and anxiety about the afterlife intensified symbolic interpretation. Scorpio's darkness felt closer. Libra's judgment felt heavier. Sagittarius's search felt riskier. Astrology also became more inward. Without public authority, it turned toward personal reflection. People used the zodiac to understand temperament rather than fate. The stars became mirrors instead of masters. This subtle shift planted the seeds of modern astrology. By surviving suppression, the zodiac learned flexibility. It could speak quietly, symbolically, emotionally. It no longer needed to predict events. It could explore meaning. The sky, once again, became a place of private contemplation. Under candlelight, scholars traced constellations while questioning their own beliefs. Astrology became a bridge between reason and faith, science and mystery. In this way, fear did not destroy astrology. It transformed it. The zodiac adapted, shedding overt power while gaining psychological depth. Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius endured not because they ruled the future, but because they reflected the human struggle to understand it. As centuries passed, the tension eased, but it never fully disappeared. The relationship between faith and fate remained complex. Yet through it all, the stars continued to rise, patient and silent, waiting for humanity to look up once more without fear. As the world slipped deeper into the medieval era, night itself seemed to grow heavier. Streets emptied earlier, candles burned lower, and silence carried more weight than sound. It was in this quiet, flickering darkness that astrology found a new rhythm. No longer shouted from temples or proclaimed by emperors, it survived in whispers, inked manuscripts, and the steady patience of those who refused to stop looking upward. The medieval sky was both familiar and threatening. The same stars still traced their paths, yet the world below felt fragile. Plagues arrived without warning. Wars erupted suddenly. Entire villages vanished into memory. In such uncertainty, people searched desperately for patterns. Anything that suggested life was not purely random. The stars, unchanged and reliable, offered comfort simply by remaining. Astrologers of this era worked slowly and carefully. Often monks, physicians, or scholars, they studied the heavens by candlelight, surrounded by parchment and shadow. Observation was methodical. Charts were drawn by hand. Calculations repeated endlessly to avoid error. The sky demanded precision, and medieval astrologers responded with devotion. Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius took on new shades of meaning during this time. Libra became closely tied to medical balance. Medieval medicine was built on the theory of humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Health depended on equilibrium. Illness signaled imbalance. Libra scales mirrored this belief perfectly. Healing, like justice, required careful adjustment rather than force. Scorpio's influence deepened in the context of disease and death. Plague, in particular, gave Scorpio symbolism a terrifying immediacy. Sudden illness, hidden infection, unseen causes. These echoed Scorpio's themes of secrecy and transformation. Death was no longer abstract. It was personal, intimate, unavoidable. Yet even here, Scorpio was not only feared. It represented the process of decay that made rebirth possible. Compost nourished soil. Death cleared space for life. Medieval thinkers, deeply influenced by Christian theology, saw transformation everywhere. Roman astrologers associated Libra with stability and civic harmony. It symbolized the ability to maintain equilibrium within a vast and diverse empire. Too much force led to rebellion. Too much leniency led to disorder. Balance was survival. Libra was no longer quiet. It was strategic. Scorpio, by contrast, represented what happened when balance failed. Romans understood punishment deeply. Discipline was harsh, consequences severe. Scorpio symbolism of retribution, secrecy, and transformation fit neatly into this worldview. It became associated with betrayal, political intrigue, and the hidden dangers within power structures. In an empire built on conquest, Scorpio also symbolized control violence. The Roman military did not strike impulsively. It planned, waited, and then acted decisively. This mirrored the Scorpion's nature. Swift, precise, final. Scorpio was not chaos. It was enforcement. Sagittarius, in Roman interpretation, embodied expansion. The archer was no longer just a seeker of truth, but a force pushing borders outward. Rome's identity was tied to movement. Legions marching, territories absorbed, cultures reshaped. Sagittarius represented ambition aligned with destiny. Yet even here, the Romans maintained control. Sagittarius was not wild exploration, but purposeful expansion. The arrow flew where it was commanded to fly. Movement served empire, not curiosity. One of the most profound Roman contributions to astrology was its integration into political legitimacy. Emperors consulted astrologers. Birth charts were analyzed. Celestial signs were interpreted as approval or warning from the cosmos itself. Power was no longer just inherited or seized. It was written in the stars. Libra's association with justice made it particularly appealing. An emperor ruling under Libra's influence could claim fairness and balance as divine qualities. Scorpio justified ruthless action when necessary. Sagittarius validated conquest as destiny. The ZODIAC became propaganda. Time itself was reorganized through the sky. Calendars were refined. Scorpio's darkness became a passage rather than a void. Sagittarius, meanwhile, was associated with movement of a different kind. Physical travel was limited and dangerous, but intellectual and spiritual journeys flourished. Pilgrimages, quests for relics, and the pursuit of sacred knowledge all fell under Sagittarius's domain. The archer aimed not at land, but at truth. The medieval worldview blended astrology with medicine, religion, and natural philosophy. The stars influenced bodily health, emotional temperament, and even spiritual disposition. This holistic approach made astrology practical. It was consulted before surgeries, journeys, and major decisions. Despite disintegration, fear lingered. Astrology walked a careful line between accepted science and suspected heresy. Practitioners avoided claims of absolute prediction. They spoke instead of tendencies, influences, and probabilities. The stars inclined, they did not command. This caution shaped medieval astrology's tone. It was softer, more contemplative. Charts were not declarations of fate, but tools for understanding balance and imbalance. Libra's scales were central here. They symbolized moderation, the virtue most praised in medieval ethics. Scorpio's association with secrecy also made it the sign of hidden knowledge. Alchemy, with an obsession with transformation, death, and rebirth, resonated deeply with Scorpio symbolism. Lead into gold, ignorance into wisdom, flesh into spirit. The process mattered more than the outcome. Sagittarius, in contrast, represented faith and vision. Its arrow pointed beyond the material world. The archer aimed toward heaven, toward divine understanding. This aligned perfectly with medieval spirituality, which saw earthly life as a journey toward salvation. The rhythm of medieval life encouraged introspection. Long nights, limited distraction, and constant uncertainty turned attention inward. Astrology became a companion in this inward turn. It offered language for understanding suffering, hope, and purpose. Time itself felt different then. Without clocks as we know them, days were shaped by light and prayer. The sky regulated life. Sunrise and sunset, phases of the moon, seasonal stars, all marked sacred rhythms. Astrology fit naturally into this temporal flow. Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius together formed a powerful narrative for medieval minds. Balance was sought. Corruption and decay were confronted. Faith and meaning were pursued. This mirrored the moral arc preached by religion and lived through daily hardship. Even skeptics could not fully dismiss astrology. Too many patterns seemed to align. Too much of life felt cyclical. The stars offer framework that made chaos intelligible. In monasteries and universities, knowledge slowly accumulated. Arabic scholars preserved and expanded astrological texts, reintroducing them to Europe through translation. This exchange enriched medieval astrology, blending precision with symbolism. As centuries passed, astrology grew quieter but deeper. It became less about control and more about understanding. The sky no longer promised certainty. It offered context. In the dim glow of candlelight, medieval astrologers continued their work, tracing the same stars our ancestors had known. Libra still weighed. Scorpio still transformed. Sagittarius still aimed beyond the visible. And in a world that often felt on the edge of collapse, that continuity mattered. The stars, constant and patient, reminded humanity that even in darkness, there was order, meaning, and a path forward if one knew how to look. As the medieval world slowly loosened its grip on fear and austerity, a different kind of light began to spread across Europe. It was not sudden, and it was not evenly shared, but it was unmistakable. Curiosity stirred again. Ancient texts resurfaced. Art, science, and philosophy began to breathe more freely. This was a renaissance, and with it came a renewed relationship with the sky, one that neither feared it nor worshipped it blindly, but sought to understand it. Astrology did not return as it once was. It returned transformed. No longer confined to candlelit secrecy, it stepped cautiously into open conversation with mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and art. The stars were no longer rivals to divine authority, nor unquestioned masters of fate. They became part of a larger, elegant system, one that connected the heavens to the human mind. Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius found new expression in this atmosphere of rebirth. Libra scales aligned naturally with Renaissance ideals of proportion and harmony. Artists obsessed over balance in composition. Architects measured symmetry with reverence. Philosophers spoke of moderation, reason, and equilibrium. Balance was beauty. Balance was truth. Libra no longer whispered. It resonated. Leonardo da Vinci's studies of the human body, the golden ratio, and natural symmetry echoed Libra's ancient message. The universe, it seemed, followed rules that could be observed, measured, and admired. The scales were no longer just moral, they were mathematical. Scorpio, too, experienced a renaissance of meaning. Its association with darkness no longer implied superstition alone. Instead, it aligned with the era's fascination with anatomy, alchemy, and the hidden workings of nature. Renaissance thinkers were not afraid to cut open bodies, to examine decay, to confront death directly. Knowledge demanded courage. Alchemy, especially, brought Scorpio symbolism into focus. The alchemical process mirrored Scorpio's cycle perfectly. Breakdown, purification, transformation. Nigredo, the blackening stage, represented death of the old self. Only through darkness could gold emerge. They were trying to live with uncertainty. They understood that meaning is not something captured once and kept forever. It is something revisited, reinterpreted, and reshaped across a lifetime. This is why the ZODIAC has endured, not because it predicts a future, but because it mirrors the inner rhythm of being human. Balance questioned, truth revealed, meaning sought, then rest, then the cycle begins again. At the end of the day, under a darkened sky, these patterns feel less abstract and more intimate. They are not symbols anymore. They are sensations. The tiredness in the body, the quiet release of emotion, the drifting awareness that precedes sleep. There is no need to remember everything you have heard. No need to hold on to details or timelines. Stories are meant to be felt, not memorized. Like the stars themselves, their influence is subtle and cumulative. Perhaps tomorrow or weeks from now, a phrase will resurface unexpectedly, or a feeling will feel familiar in a new situation. That is how these stories work. Scorpio was no longer feared. It was necessary. This era embraced the idea that truth often hides beneath the surface. Secrets were not sinful. They were puzzles. Scorpio's realm became one of investigation, depth, and psychological insight. The Renaissance mind wanted to know what lay beneath appearances, whether in the human body, the natural world, or the soul. Sagittarius flourished in this environment of exploration. The world itself was expanding. New continents appeared on maps. Ships crossed oceans once thought endless. Knowledge traveled faster than ever before. Sagittarius, the archer of horizons, found a perfect mirror in this age of discovery. Explorers embodied Sagittarius' spirit. They aimed beyond the known world, guided by stars both literal and symbolic. Their journeys were dangerous, irreversible, and transformative. Each voyage reshaped how humanity understood itself and its place in the cosmos. At the same time, intellectual exploration expanded just as rapidly. Universities grew. Scholars revisited Greek and Roman philosophy. Questions once forbidden were now debated openly. Sagittarius' hunger for truth fueled this movement. Belief was no longer enough. Experience mattered. The Renaissance also marked a critical shift in astrology's role. Astronomy and astrology began to separate, though they still shared roots. Figures like Copernicus studied planetary motion with mathematical rigor, while astrologers interpreted celestial influence symbolically. The sky became both measurable and meaningful. This duality enriched astrology rather than diminishing it. Libra's balance now existed between science and art. Scorpio's depth bridged material and spiritual inquiry. Sagittarius' vision connected discovery with philosophy. Importantly, astrology became personal again. Birth charts regained popularity among scholars and nobles alike. But the tone had changed. Rather than declaring fate, astrology explored character. The stars suggested tendencies, not destinies. Choice returned to the human center. This shift reflected a broader Renaissance belief. Humans were not passive subjects of fate, but active participants in creation. The heavens influenced, but they did not imprison. The zodiac became a dialogue rather than a decree. Artists incorporated zodiac symbolism into paintings, sculptures, and architecture. Libra appeared in allegories of justice and harmony. Scorpio lurked in depictions of death, temptation, and transformation. Sagittarius soared in images of wisdom, travel, and divine aspiration. The sky entered visual culture, blending seamlessly with human expression. Emotionally, this era softened astrology's edge. Fear gave way to fascination. The unknown was no longer something to suppress, but something to explore. Scorpio's darkness became intriguing rather than terrifying. Sagittarius' restlessness became aspirational. Yet the Renaissance did not erase uncertainty. Plague still struck. Wars still raged. But people approached these events differently. Rather than seeing them as random punishment, they sought causes, patterns, and meaning. Astrology offered one lens among many. Libra's emphasis on balance extended into ethics. How much reason? How much faith? How much ambition? The Renaissance sought moderation, even in expansion. This tension made the period dynamic, creative, and occasionally unstable. As knowledge grew, so did humility. The more the universe was studied, the more complex it appeared. Sagittarius' arrow always pointed farther than expected. Every answer opened new questions. This endless pursuit defined the era. By the end of the Renaissance, astrology had changed permanently. It was no longer a tool of fear or control. It was a language, one of many, used to explore humanity's relationship with the cosmos. Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius emerged from this period enriched. Balance was refined. Transformation was understood. Exploration was celebrated. The zodiac survived not by resisting change, but by evolving with it. And as the stars continued their ancient paths, they now shone over a world that dared once again ask questions, not out of desperation, but out of wonder. As the world moved beyond the Renaissance and into the modern age, something quiet but profound happened to astrology. It stopped belonging exclusively to kings, scholars, and institutions, and slowly drifted into the hands of individuals. The sky no longer hovered above humanity as a system of authority. Instead, it became a language of self-understanding. Science advanced rapidly. Telescopes revealed that the heavens were far larger and more complex than anyone had imagined. Planets were no longer wandering gods, but worlds of rock and gas, obeying physical laws. For many, this could have ended astrology entirely. And yet it didn't. It adapted. Astrology survived because it changed what it was asking. Instead of asking what will happen, it began asking, who am I? Fate gave way to personality. Destiny softened into tendency. The zodiac became psychological rather than prophetic. Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius found new relevance in this shift. Libra became associated not with courts or cosmic judgment, but with relationships. Balance moved inward. Harmony became emotional rather than societal. Libra now described how people relate, compromise, and seek peace within themselves and with others. In a modern world filled with noise and contradiction, this mattered deeply. As traditional structures weakened, religious certainty, rigid class systems, unquestioned authority, people sought new ways to define themselves. Libra offered a framework for understanding inner conflict and a desire for fairness in personal life. Scorpio underwent perhaps the most dramatic transformation. No longer feared primarily as a symbol of death, it became a symbol of emotional depth. Psychology emerged as a discipline, and with it came language for trauma, desire, repression, and transformation. Scorpio fit seamlessly into this world. The hidden became important. The unconscious mind became a frontier. Scorpio's ancient association with secrecy, intensity, and rebirth found new expression in therapy rooms rather than temples. Transformation was no longer imposed by fate. It was pursued through self-awareness. This reframing made Scorpio deeply attractive. It promised authenticity. It suggested that confronting darkness could lead to empowerment. In a world that increasingly valued emotional truth, Scorpio became a guide to the inner landscape. Sagittarius, meanwhile, aligned naturally with modern ideas of freedom and growth. As travel became easier and education more accessible, Sagittarius's love of exploration flourished. The search for meaning moved beyond religion into philosophy, culture, and personal belief systems. Modern Sagittarius was not bound to conquest or empire. Its arrows aimed toward experience. Different cultures, ideas, and perspectives became the new horizons. This shift reflected a broader human desire to understand the world without owning it. Astrology itself became democratized. Newspapers printed horoscopes. Books explained birth charts in simple language. Astrology entered popular culture, stripped of fear and ceremony. Critics dismissed it as entertainment, yet millions found comfort in it. This accessibility changed astrology's tone. It became gentler, more affirming. Libra was praised for charm and diplomacy. Scorpio for passion and intensity. Sagittarius for optimism and curiosity. The zodiac began to function as a vocabulary for self-expression. Importantly, this modern astrology did not demand belief. It invited reflection. People used it as a mirror, not a map. Even skeptics recognized its symbolic power. Archetypes resonated regardless of literal truth. This shift aligned with broader cultural movements. Psychology emphasized narrative identity. People began to understand themselves through stories of childhood, relationships, growth. Astrology offered ready-made archetypes that helped structure these stories. Libra's struggle between self and other. Scorpio's journey through shadow. Sagittarius's restless search for meaning. These themes felt timeless because they were human. The stars did not cause them. They reflected them. Technology accelerated this process. Astrology apps personalized charts instantly. Ancient symbolism met modern convenience. The sky became intimate again, mapped onto individual lives with unprecedented ease. Yet, something was lost in this simplification. Depth gave way to slogans. Scorpio became intense. Libra became indecisive. Sagittarius became free-spirited. The nuance of history faded. Still, beneath these labels, the deeper patterns remained. Those who looked closer found that astrology could still offer insight, not as truth, but as language. It helped people articulate feelings they struggled to name. In a fragmented world, astrology offered continuity. It connected modern lives to ancient observers who once stared at the same sky. The symbols endured because they evolved, shedding authority while retaining meaning. Libra no longer ruled courts, but hearts. Scorpio no longer guarded the underworld, but the psyche. Sagittarius no longer led armies, but curiosity. The sky, once feared and revered, now served as companion rather than master. It did not command. It listened. And perhaps that is why astrology survived into the modern age. Not because it explained the universe, but because it helped people explain themselves. Quietly, symbolically, and without judgment, under the same stars that have always watched in silence. In the modern world, Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius no longer sit only in ancient charts or dusty manuscripts. They live in conversations, in quiet moments of self-reflection, in the way people describe themselves when words feel insufficient. These signs have drifted from the sky into the mind, becoming emotional archetypes rather than cosmic rulers. What matters now is not whether the stars cause personality, but why these symbols continue to feel so familiar. Libra, in the modern mind, represents a deep longing for connection, not just romance, but understanding. In a world fractured by opinions, identities, and constant noise, Libra feels a tension between self and other more acutely than most. It is a discomfort of disagreement, the ache of imbalance in relationships, the exhaustion that comes from trying to keep peace when peace feels fragile. Modern Libra energy often shows up as a question rather than an answer. How do I stay true to myself without harming others? How do I choose when every option feels weighted? This indecision is not weakness. It is sensitivity. Libra feels the pull of multiple truths at once. It sees nuance where others see certainty. Psychologically, Libra reflects the social self, the part of the mind that adjusts, negotiates, and mirrors. In healthy expression, this creates empathy and fairness. In excess, it creates self-doubt and people-pleasing. The scales are always moving, responding to the emotional environment. What makes Libra so resonant today is that modern life demands constant balance, work and rest, independence and belonging, expression and restraint. Libra becomes a symbol of that ongoing calibration. There is no final equilibrium, only adjustment. Scorpio, by contrast, occupies the emotional depths many prefer to avoid. In the modern psyche, Scorpio represents intensity that cannot be diluted. It is the feeling beneath the feeling, the truth beneath the story we tell ourselves. Where Libra negotiates, Scorpio confronts. Modern Scorpio energy often appears during crisis. Loss, betrayal, obsession, grief, profound love. These experiences strip away superficial identity and expose something raw. Scorpio does not allow half measures. It asks uncomfortable questions. What are you afraid of? What are you hiding? What must end for something else to begin? Psychologically, Scorpio aligns closely with shadow work, the process of acknowledging parts of the self that are repressed or denied. Modern therapy, with its emphasis on trauma, unconscious patterns, and emotional honesty, echoes Scorpio's ancient symbolism almost perfectly. What frightens people about Scorpio is not darkness itself, but depth. To look deeply is to risk change. Scorpio represents that risk. Transformation is not gentle. It dismantles identity before rebuilding it. This is why Scorpio is often misunderstood as destructive when it is actually regenerative. In modern culture, Scorpio energy is everywhere. In art that explores pain without apology, in music that confronts loss directly, in narratives that refuse neat resolution. It resonates because it validates suffering without rushing to fix it. Then there is Sagittarius, standing at a different psychological horizon. Where Scorpio goes inward, Sagittarius looks outward. In the modern mind, Sagittarius represents the search for meaning in a world where traditional belief systems no longer hold universal authority. People today are surrounded by information, yet often feel directionless. Sagittarius reflects this tension. It is curiosity mixed with restlessness, the desire to understand life beyond material success, the urge to travel, learn, question, and expand perspective. Modern Sagittarius energy appears in philosophy podcasts, solo travel, cultural exploration, spiritual experimentation. It is the part of the psyche that resists confinement. It asks, "Is this all there is?" and refuses to accept easy answers. Psychologically, Sagittarius aligns with meaning-making. Humans need narrative to survive. We need to believe our experiences fit into a larger story. Sagittarius provides that arc. It turns experience into wisdom, movement into growth. But Sagittarius, like the other signs, has a shadow. Its love of freedom can become avoidance. Its optimism can become denial. Constant movement can become restlessness that never settles. The arrow can be released before the aim is clear. What makes Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius especially powerful together in the modern mind is their sequence. They form an emotional progression that mirrors lived experience. First comes Libra, the awareness of imbalance, the recognition that something is off, that harmony has been disturbed. This is often the beginning of inner conflict, the question phase, the weighing of options. Then comes Scorpio, the confrontation, the moment when avoidance is no longer possible, when emotions surface, truths are revealed, and change becomes inevitable. This is the most uncomfortable phase, but also the most honest. Finally comes Sagittarius, the integration. After loss or transformation, there's movement, perspective widens, meaning begins to form. The experience becomes part of a larger narrative rather than an isolated wound. This progression appears everywhere in modern life. In relationships that begin with negotiation, pass through conflict, and end in growth or separation. In careers that start with dissatisfaction, move through crisis, and lead to reinvention. In personal identity itself. These signs endure because they map internal processes rather than external fate. The sky no longer dictates events, but it still reflects emotional truth. Importantly, modern astrology does not demand belief in cosmic causation. Many people engage with it symbolically, intuitively, even playfully, yet the resonance remains strong. Archetypes do not need literal truth to be meaningful. Libra helps people articulate relational tension. Scorpio gives language to emotional intensity. Sagittarius offers a framework for hope beyond hardship. Together, they form a psychological vocabulary that feels both ancient and immediate. In an era marked by rapid change, identity fluidity, and existential uncertainty, these symbols offer continuity. They remind people that confusion, pain, and searching are not failures. They are phases. This is why astrology resurges during times of crisis. Not because people suddenly believe the stars control them, but because they seek meaning when structures collapse. The ZODIAC provides narrative shape when life feels chaotic. Modern technology amplifies this effect. Social media spreads astrological language quickly, sometimes superficially, but even surface-level engagement introduces deeper ideas. People recognize themselves in patterns, even if imperfectly. Critics often dismiss astrology as simplistic, yet they overlook its psychological function. Humans have always used symbols to understand themselves. Astrology is one such symbolic system. Ancient, adaptable, emotionally resonant. Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius are not instructions. They are mirrors. They reflect aspects of the human condition that science alone does not address. Longing, fear, hope, transformation. In the end, their power lies not in prediction, but in recognition. When someone reads about Libra and feels seen in their struggle for balance, something softens. When Scorpio validates the depth of pain, something releases. When Sagittarius reminds someone that meaning can still be found, something lifts. The stars do not change, but humans do. And yet, these symbols remain relevant because they evolve alongside us. They survive not as rules, but as stories. Stories we continue to tell ourselves as we search for understanding under the same vast, silent sky. When Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius are viewed not as isolated signs, but as a continuous movement, something deeper becomes visible. They stop feeling like separate personalities and begin to resemble a single journey, one that unfolds quietly, emotionally, and repeatedly across human life. Their placement together in the sky is not accidental in meaning, even if it is astronomical coincidence. Humans have always sensed progression in patterns, and here, the progression feels unmistakable. Libra arrives first as a moment of awareness. It is the point where imbalance becomes noticeable. Before this, tension may exist, but remains unnamed. Libra names it. It brings consciousness to discomfort. Something feels uneven, unresolved, unsettled. This awareness is gentle at first. It does not accuse or demand. It simply asks, is this sustainable? In human experience, this moment often feels calm on the surface but restless underneath. Libra energy can appear as overthinking, hesitation, or the desire to talk things through endlessly. It is the mind weighing emotional truth against social harmony. It wants peace, but not at the cost of fairness. It wants connection, but not at the cost of self. This is why Libra often appears polite, agreeable, even passive. But internally, it is busy. The scales never stop moving. Every thought is countered by another. Every feeling is examined from multiple angles. Libra holds contradiction without resolution, and that holding is exhausting. Eventually, the scales tip. They always do. Balance cannot be maintained indefinitely when something underneath is decaying. This is where Scorpio emerges, not suddenly, but inevitably. Scorpio does not ask whether something is wrong. It already knows. It does not negotiate. It exposes. Where Libra hesitates, Scorpio commits. Where Libra weighs, Scorpio cuts. This transition is often experienced as crisis. The relationship breaks. The truth surfaces. The illusion collapses. What was once discussed calmly now feels unavoidable and intense. Emotionally, Scorpio represents the moment when awareness becomes confrontation. This is not comfortable. It is not gentle. It demands honesty, even when honesty hurts. Scorpio strips away pretense and reveals what has been suppressed beneath politeness and compromise. In life, this phase often feels like loss. Something ends. Something dies. Identity fractures. Scorpio energy brings people face to face with fear, grief, jealousy, obsession, and raw desire. These emotions are not polite. They are not balanced. They are powerful. Yet Scorpio is not chaos. It is precision. It targets what is rotten, what is false, what can no longer survive. The pain it brings is purposeful, even when it feels overwhelming. Scorpio does not destroy for pleasure. It transforms through necessity. Once this transformation occurs, there is emptiness, a pause. The old form is gone, but the new one has not yet arrived. This is a fragile space, often misunderstood. People mistake it for failure, depression, or confusion, but it is a threshold, and then, slowly, Sagittarius enters. Sagittarius does not erase what Scorpio uncovered. It carries it forward. It asks a different question now, not what went wrong, but what could be learned. It looks outward because the inner work has been done. It seeks distance, perspective, and meaning. Emotionally, Sagittarius represents the rebuilding phase, not reconstruction of the old, but movement toward the new. This is where curiosity returns, where laughter feels possible again, where the future opens slightly, even if it is still uncertain. Sagittarius energy often appears as restlessness after trauma, the urge to leave, to change environments, to explore new ideas. This is not avoidance. It is integration. Movement helps the psyche process what still feels heavy when standing still. Philosophically, Sagittarius reframes experience. Pain becomes story. Loss becomes lesson. The past becomes context rather than identity. This reframing is not denial. It is survival. Together, Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius form a cycle that repeats endlessly. Awareness, confrontation, meaning. This cycle exists in relationships, careers, belief systems, and inner growth. It is not linear. People move through it multiple times, sometimes overlapping, sometimes looping back. This is why these three signs feel so connected. They are not separate chapters. They are phases of the same narrative. Libra senses imbalance. Scorpio demands change. Sagittarius carries the aftermath forward. In the sky, this progression feels natural. The scales set the stage. The Scorpion brings the climax. The Archer offers resolution, though not finality. The story does not end, it expands. This sequence also explains why these signs often feel intense when grouped together. There is little neutrality here. Each phase involves emotional investment. Even Libra's calm is effortful. Even Sagittarius' optimism is earned. Psychologically, this trio maps the human capacity for growth. Growth does not begin with action. It begins with awareness. It does not deepen without pain. And it does not complete without meaning. Modern life accelerates this cycle. Relationships move faster. Careers shift abruptly. Identities evolve under pressure. People experience Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius transitions more frequently, sometimes without rest in between. This can feel destabilizing. But recognizing the pattern offers reassurance. If something feels off, Libra is at work. If everything is breaking open, Scorpio is present. If the desire to move on, explore, or understand arises, Sagittarius is already guiding forward. Importantly, none of these phases should be skipped. Libra without Scorpio becomes avoidance. Scorpio without Sagittarius becomes despair. Sagittarius without Libra becomes recklessness. Balance requires sequence. The sky presents this trio as a lesson in flow rather than fixity. Life is not meant to stay balanced forever, nor is it meant to remain in darkness, nor is it meant to wander without reflection. Each phase feeds the next. This is why ancient observers grouped these signs together intuitively. Even without modern psychology, they recognized emotional rhythm. They saw that balance precedes transformation, and transformation precedes expansion. In sleep and quiet reflection, this pattern feels especially clear. When the mind relaxes, it naturally drifts through these phases, reviewing what feels off, confronting what hurts, imagining what could be next. The stars simply mirror what the mind already does. Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius together offer not answers, but companionship. They remind the listener that inner turbulence follows a pattern. That confusion has a phase. That pain has a purpose. That movement will return. In a world obsessed with resolution, this sequence offers something gentler, understanding. It suggests that not knowing is part of the journey, that breaking down is not failure, that seeking meaning is not escape. The sky does not rush this process. The signs rise slowly, night after night, repeating their ancient dance. They do not demand action. They invite recognition. And in recognizing this progression, balance questioned, truth revealed, meaning sought, something within the listener softens. The journey feels less lonely. The phases feel less random. Because this story has been told before. Not just in the stars, but in every human life that has ever tried to make sense of itself under a vast, quiet sky. Tonight, when you look up at the sky, or even when you only imagine it with your eyes closed, you are seeing the same stars that watched over first humans who ever wondered about their place in the universe. The air may feel different, the world louder, more crowded, more complex, but the sky has not changed. It has been patient. It has waited through empires, extinctions, revolutions, and renaissances, holding its pattern steady while everything below shifted again and again. This realization carries a quiet weight. The problems that feel overwhelming today once felt overwhelming thousands of years ago, just in different forms. Fear, love, loss, ambition, uncertainty, none of these are new. Humans have always searched the darkness for reassurance that life is not random, that suffering is context, that meaning exists beyond the immediate moment. The stars never answered directly, yet they never turned away either. Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius still rise in the same order they always have. Balance, transformation, movement. Even now, this sequence mirrors what unfolds inside the human mind during moments of reflection. First comes the awareness that something feels off, then the confrontation with what must change. then the urge to move forward, to find meaning beyond the rupture. This rhythm did not come from astrology. Astrology came from this rhythm. When modern people dismiss ancient sky watchers as naive, they overlook something essential. Those early observers were not trying to escape reality. They were trying to survive it. The stars offer consistency in a world that rarely did. When crops failed or loved ones died, the sky remained unchanged. That constancy mattered. It still does. In an age where everything updates constantly, news, technology, identity itself, the idea that something remains unchanged is strangely comforting. The sky does not react to trends. It does not rush. It does not demand attention. It simply exists. And in that existence, it offers perspective. Libra in the modern sky reminds us that balance is not a destination, but a process. No one arrives at perfect harmony and stays there. Balance must be recalculated daily, sometimes hourly. Relationships shift. Emotions fluctuate. Values evolve. The scales never stop moving because life never stops changing. Scorpio reminds us that avoiding darkness does not eliminate it. Pain that is ignored does not disappear. It waits. Transformation requires honesty, and honesty often hurts. This has always been true. Ancient myths framed it as divine punishment. Modern psychology frames it as growth. The language changes, but the experience remains the same. Sagittarius reminds us that meaning is not handed down, it is pursued. No belief system, philosophy, or ideology can replace lived experience. People must walk their own paths, ask their own questions, and discover what feels true to them. This search can be lonely, but it is also what keeps life alive. Together, these signs form a quiet reassurance. Whatever phase you are in, it is not unfamiliar to the universe. Awareness, loss, renewal, these are not personal failures. They are shared patterns. When people watch the night sky today, they often do so in moments of stillness, during power outages, on camping trips, in the quiet hours before sleep. These are moments when distractions fall away and the mind becomes receptive. The sky feels closer then, even though it is impossibly far. There is something deeply human about looking up when words fail. The stars do not interrupt. They do not offer advice. They allow space for thought. In that space, meaning emerges naturally. Modern astronomy tells us that the light from many stars began its journey long before humans existed. Some of the stars we see are already gone, their light arriving long after their extinction. This knowledge adds another layer of quiet awe. The sky is not just constant. It is a record of deep time. Astrology, stripped of superstition, becomes a poetic response to this reality. It is humanity's way of speaking back to the universe, not with certainty, but with story, not with control, but with curiosity. Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius are not instructions written in the stars. They are reflections of the questions humans ask again and again. How do I live with others? How do I survive loss? How do I keep going? These questions do not need definitive answers to be meaningful. Sometimes the act of asking is enough. In the quiet before sleep, the mind naturally drifts backward and forward at the same time. Memories surface. Possibilities appear. Regrets soften. Hopes flicker. This is the same mental state ancient humans experienced when they stared into the firelight beneath the stars. The context has changed, but the inner experience has not. The sky becomes a bridge between past and present, between those who came before and those who will come after. Everyone who has ever lived has shared this view, even if only briefly. There is humility in that thought. Personal struggles feel smaller without being invalidated. Joy feels deeper knowing it has been felt before. Grief feels less isolating knowing it has been endured across centuries. Libra teaches that coexistence requires effort. Scorpio teaches that transformation requires courage. Sagittarius teaches that meaning requires movement. These lessons are not cosmic mandates. They are human truths reflected upward. The stars do not rush you through these phases. They rise and set at their own pace, reminding us that growth cannot be forced. Healing cannot be rushed. Understanding unfolds when it is ready. This perspective is especially gentle for those trying to sleep. The night does not demand resolution. It invites rest. The sky does not ask you to solve your life. It allows you to simply exist within it. As breathing slows and thoughts drift, the ancient rhythm continues above. Libra balances. Scorpio transforms. Sagittarius points forward. Night after night. Century after century. You are not behind. You are not late. You are not failing. You are moving through phases that have always existed. The sky has seen this before, and it will see it again, not with judgment, not with urgency, but with quiet patience. Under the same stars that watch the first questions form in the human mind, you are allowed to rest. As the night stretches on and the world slowly quiets, there is a moment when thought begins to soften. The edges of the day blur. Concerns lose their sharpness. What remains is awareness without urgency. This is a space where the sky has always belonged, not as a source of answers, but as a companion to reflection. In this stillness, the long journey of Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius comes to rest, not with conclusion, but with an understanding. For as long as humans have existed, sleep has been more than rest. It has been a surrender, a letting go of control. Ancient people understood this instinctively. Night was not something to conquer, but something to enter carefully. Fires were dimmed, voices lowered. The sky took over, vast and silent, reminding everyone that not everything needs to be held awake. In modern life, this surrender has become difficult. Minds remain active long after bodies are tired. Thoughts loop, worries linger. The world demands attention, even in darkness. Yet the sky remains unchanged, offering the same invitation always has: to release, to trust, to pause. Libra's lesson at this stage is quiet acceptance, not the balance of decision-making or social harmony, but the balance between effort and rest. There comes a point when thinking more does not create clarity, when weighing options only deepens fatigue. Libra at night teaches that balance sometimes means stopping. This is not failure. It is wisdom. Scorpio, too, changes at night. Its intensity softens into depth rather than pressure. Darkness is no longer something to fear. It is something to inhabit safely. The shadows that feel threatening during the day often feel less so when the world sleeps. Emotions that felt overwhelming lose their urgency. Scorpio becomes introspective rather than confrontational. At night, transformation does not require action. It happens quietly, beneath awareness. Memories reorganize. Emotions process themselves. The mind, free from conscious control, begins its own healing work. Scorpio reminds us that some change only happens when we stop trying to force it. Sagittarius, in the still hours, does not urge movement outward. Instead, it invites gentle expansion inward. Dreams wander. Imagination loosens. Meaning is not chased. It drifts into awareness softly, symbolically. Questions no longer demand answers. Curiosity becomes peaceful rather than restless. This is a Sagittarius of sleep, not the archer aiming far, but the traveler resting, trusting that the road will still be there in the morning. Together, these energies dissolve into something simpler, not a lesson, not a moral, but a feeling, a sense that life, with all its phases, does not need to be resolved tonight. That understanding unfolds over time, often when we are not consciously seeking it. The stars have always known this. They do not hurry their cycles. They do not respond to anxiety. They rise and set regardless of human concern. And in doing so, they offer a model of patience that no philosophy can improve upon. When ancient people told stories of the sky, they were not trying to explain everything. They were trying to live with uncertainty. They understood that meaning is not something captured once and kept forever. It is something revisited, reinterpreted, and reshaped across a lifetime. This is why the ZODIAC has endured, not because it predicts the future, but because it mirrors the inner rhythm of being human. Balance questioned, truth revealed, meaning sought, then rest, then the cycle begins again. At the end of the day, under a darkened sky, these patterns feel less abstract and more intimate. They are not symbols anymore. They are sensations. The tiredness in the body, the quiet release of emotion, the drifting awareness that precedes sleep. There is no need to remember everything you have heard. No need to hold on to details or timelines. Stories are meant to be felt, not memorized. Like the stars themselves, their influence is subtle and cumulative. Perhaps tomorrow, or weeks from now, a phrase will resurface unexpectedly, or a feeling will feel familiar in a new situation. That is how these stories work. They settle quietly, waiting until they are needed. As the night deepens, the boundaries between past and present blur. The same sky that watched over ancient rivers, medieval cities, and quiet villages now stretches above modern homes. Time compresses. The distance between then and now feels smaller. This shared sky connects every human who has ever paused to look up, wondering about their place in the vastness. Every fear felt, every hope carried, every ending endured, every beginning imagined. The stars have witnessed it all without commentary, without judgment, without expectation. And perhaps that is their greatest gift. In a world that constantly evaluates, measures, and demands, the sky simply allows. It does not ask who you are or what you have done. It does not care whether you believe in it or not. It is present regardless. This presence is enough. As sleep approaches, thoughts may loosen their grip. Images may form and dissolve. Sensations may blur. This is not loss of control. It is return to the natural rhythm that has guided human rest for as long as there have been humans to rest. Libra's balancing mind grows quiet. Scorpio's depth becomes still water. Sagittarius's horizon fades into dream. Nothing needs to be achieved here. Nothing needs to be solved. You are allowed to exist without explanation. The sky does not require you to understand it. It does not require you to understand yourself. It simply holds space while you rest. Tomorrow will bring its own questions, its own imbalances, its own transformations and searches for meaning. But tonight belongs to stillness. Let the stories fade gently into the background. Let the stars remain where they are. Let sleep arrive without resistance. You are part of a much longer story than any single day could contain. And for now, that story is allowed to pause.